Welcome back to True Echo, the channel where real justice echoes louder than power, and the stories you hear will challenge what you believe is possible. Today's tale starts with a cruel joke, but ends in a room full of the world's wealthiest people watching everything fall apart at the hands of the very woman they tried to humiliate. This is more than a comeback, it's a reckoning. The golden envelope had been meant as a punchline. Ava Coleman knew that the moment Jonathan Bennett handed it to her, smiling the way predators smile just before they bite. "Charity gala this Saturday," he said, the invitation glinting like a trap in his hand. "Ultra formal, of course. I'm sure you've got something suitable in that little closet of yours." Laughter had followed, not the kind that welcomes, but the kind that wounds. Ava had simply nodded, taking the invitation without flinching. She didn't blink when his wife, Emily, added with a sneer, "I'll bet you 100,000 she doesn't show. And if she does, 10 minutes before she bolts out crying." Ava didn't respond to that either. She had learned long ago that silence, when paired with patience, could be its own weapon. She clutched the invitation in her calloused hands, the same hands that had scrubbed every inch of their estate for the last 2 years, and she went home. But what Jonathan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Ava Coleman was not who they thought she was. They saw her as a cleaning woman. Invisible. Disposable. But once upon a time, she had danced through those very marble halls in the arms of a man named Edward Bennett, her father. Before the poison. Before the lies. Before her mother was cast out like trash and Ava was reduced to a name on an hourly payroll. Now they wanted a show. They would get one. By Saturday night, as the city's most elite socialites gathered beneath crystal chandeliers and sipped from vintage champagne flutes, they were oblivious to the storm that was coming. Jonathan stood proud, glass in hand, whispering cruel jokes to his guests. "Just wait till you see who shows up," he chuckled. "She thinks she belongs." And then, the room fell silent. A single footstep echoed from the top of the sweeping staircase. Ava Coleman appeared, not as a janitor, but a vision of elegance in emerald silk, wearing diamond earrings that shimmered like truth itself. Her hair was pulled into a graceful updo, and on her hand, a ring glinted, a blue gem surrounded by gold filigree. The crowd gasped. Then came the whispers. Then, the laughter. But Ava didn't flinch. She descended the stairs slowly, gracefully, as if every step grounded her more deeply in her right to be there. The stares and mockery slid off her like rain on marble. Ava had been through worse than stairs. She had walked through fire and come out steel. She stopped directly in front of Jonathan and Emily. "Thank you for the invitation," she said coolly, dipping into a subtle curtsy. "It's truly enlightening to see you all like this." Emily's smile faltered. Jonathan's throat tightened. Something was wrong, and it had just begun. Jonathan Bennett prided himself on control, of people, perception, and the truth. But as Ava Coleman glided away into the glittering crowd, poised like royalty beneath the chandeliers of the Bennett mansion, he felt something slip. Not from his hand, but from deep inside his chest. A sense that something ancient and buried had just been unearthed. "She's bluffing," Jonathan hissed to Emily, who watched Ava with narrowed eyes. "She's just trying to make us sweat. She's got nothing." Emily wasn't so sure. "She walked in here like she owned the place. Like she was one of us." "No," Jonathan growled. "She's not. But she was. And more than that." Ava navigated the crowd with unsettling composure. Wherever she passed, conversations stilled. Those who had laughed now watched with careful curiosity. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't shrinking. She was absorbing the room, owning it. In a far corner near an antique table, Ava paused. Her fingers traced the wood's polished surface. Her breath caught in her throat. 20 years ago, she had hidden beneath this very table. She'd been just a child, frightened, confused, holding her mother's trembling hand as Jonathan screamed and ripped legal documents from a lawyer's briefcase, declaring that this house would never belong to bastards. He'd been 17. Already cruel. Already desperate. Ava closed her eyes for a moment. The ring on her hand, the one her father had slipped on her finger the night before he died, glowed faintly under the chandelier's light. That ring wasn't a decoration. It was proof. And tonight, it would burn through every lie Jonathan Bennett had ever told. Across the room, Martha Sullivan, a woman who had once sneered at Ava's thrift store shoes when she scrubbed the marble floors, approached with a predatory grin. My, she said, sipping her rose. What a transformation. You clean up well, Ava. Did you win the lottery? Ava smiled softly. Something like that. Though I've always believed wealth comes in many forms. Oh, please. Martha waved dismissively. You think playing dress-up will change how this world works? You're still just the help. Ava met her eyes without blinking. Funny. That's exactly what my brother used to say. Martha's brow creased. Your brother? Before the venom could return to Martha's voice, Ava turned and walked away. Behind her, a quiet unease began to ripple through the room. At the bar, Jonathan refilled his drink with a shaking hand. He hadn't planned for this. He'd wanted a scene. Humiliation. But Ava had turned the room into a stage, and she wasn't playing the fool. She was the one holding the script. Jonathan, a voice said beside him. It was Senator Douglas Evans, one of his biggest donors. You didn't tell me the maid was your relative. She's not, Jonathan barked. She's delusional. Probably stole that dress. Or borrowed it. The senator raised an eyebrow. She's wearing the Bennett sapphire ring. Jonathan froze. His blood turned cold. That ring had been locked away in a drawer after his father's death, or so he'd thought. He'd searched for it frantically after Ava and her mother disappeared. Had they taken it? Or had it been given to her, intentionally? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down, he knew. Ava crossed the room once more, this time stopping at the foot of the stage where a string quartet had just finished playing. She turned toward the crowd with slow precision. A hush fell. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. My name is Ava Coleman, she said. But it used to be something else. Emily stood stock still. Jonathan's heart slammed against his ribs. I was born Ava Coleman Bennett, Ava continued, her voice firm, composed, yet soaked in something deeper, grief, maybe. Or purpose. And this house used to be my home. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the hall. I was raised here, under this roof, by a man named Edward Bennett. My father. A man many of you admired. A man whose death was ruled a heart attack. She looked directly at Jonathan. But it wasn't. Jonathan's jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. Emily grabbed his arm. Jonathan. What is she saying? She's lying, he hissed. But Ava had already stepped onto the stage. I know this is a charity gala, she said. But I believe charity begins with truth. So let's begin with that. She reached into her clutch and held up a small voice recorder. Jonathan's drink shattered in his hand. Ava pressed the button. Jonathan's own voice, colder and sharper than any dagger, filled the room. Dr. Carter, I said mark it down as a heart attack. If you mention arsenic again, you'll lose everything. Don't test me. Gasps exploded through the room. People stood. Whispers turned into stunned chaos. Jonathan stumbled back, eyes wild. That's doctored, he screamed. She's faking it. That's not real. Ava turned to the crowd, raising the ring on her hand. This is the Bennett heirloom, she said. My father gave it to me the night before he died. And that recording? It's only the beginning. Silence fell again. Jonathan's face had gone white as bone. Ava's eyes locked on his. You tried to erase me, Jonathan. But I've been preparing for this night for 20 years. And now, the truth will finally have its turn. Panic surged through Jonathan Bennett's veins like poison. He tried to speak, to call her bluff, but the words tangled in his throat. All around him, once friendly faces turned cold and suspicious. This wasn't the smug, triumphant gala he'd orchestrated, it was a trap, and he had walked right into it. Ava stood firm on the stage, her calm voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. For years, I kept silent. I cleaned the floors you walked on. I smiled through your insults. I survived while you celebrated the empire you stole. But tonight isn't about survival. Tonight is about truth. From the back of the room, a familiar, weathered man stepped forward, Dr. Thomas Carter. Guests gasped. Jonathan froze. Dr. Carter, a guest whispered. Is that him? Edward Bennett's old physician. The aging man adjusted his glasses and walked to the front of the stage. His expression was grave, but steady. I should have spoken sooner, Dr. Carter began, his voice tight with the burden of 2 decades of guilt. Edward Bennett did not die of natural causes. The autopsy revealed arsenic poisoning. But Jonathan Bennett, he turned, eyes narrowed, voice hardening. Threatened my license, my family, my livelihood. He forced me to falsify the records. The room erupted. Some gasped in horror. Others rose to their feet. Whispers turned into outrage as the truth, unthinkable and undeniable, unfolded in front of them. Jonathan staggered back, his pride unraveling before a sea of judgment. You're lying, he screamed. You're working with her. This is all, this is an attack. But no one came to his defense. Even Emily stood motionless, her face drained of color, eyes locked in horror on her husband. She turned slowly, as if seeing him for the first time in her life. Jonathan, tell me it's not true. He couldn't. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Ava stepped forward, descending from the stage like a queen reclaiming her throne. Her steps were slow, deliberate, and with every stride, Jonathan shrank. When she reached him, she looked him dead in the eyes. You murdered your own father, she whispered. You turned our mother into a ghost. You made me clean the very house I was born in. And now you expect to lie your way out again? Jonathan's face twisted with desperation. You don't understand. I had to. He was going to divide the company. He was going to give you everything. He said the family fortune should go to both his children. A hush fell again. There it was. The confession. Clear. Cold. Brutal. Guests turned, appalled. Emily collapsed into a chair, silent tears spilling down her cheeks. Jonathan reached for her hand, but she recoiled as if he were poison himself. Ava turned back to the crowd. There's more, she said. Jonathan didn't stop at murder. He siphoned millions from the Bennett Charitable Foundation, money meant for orphan children and cancer patients, and funneled it into offshore accounts. She raised a hand. The doors to the ballroom swung open. In strode 2 new figures, Sarah Mitchell, a respected investigative journalist, and Alex Turner, a federal prosecutor known for dismantling corrupt empires. The crowd parted like waves. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah began, holding up a file, this is a formal statement of evidence presented to the U.S. Attorney's Office. It includes forensic audits, wire transfers, and whistleblower testimony confirming embezzlement, fraud, and bribery. All connected to Jonathan Bennett. Jonathan's legs gave out. He fell into a chair, trembling, lips quivering. I was trying to protect the company. I was trying to keep the family together. Alex Turner stepped forward, expression steely. Mr. Bennett, everything you built, every cent you stole, is coming undone. Your crimes are no longer secrets. You are no longer untouchable. A pair of uniformed officers entered behind them. Jonathan's mouth opened in a silent scream. His eyes darted around the room for a single friendly face, but everyone had turned. His empire of influence, built on silencing truth and destroying family, had crumbled in the span of one night. Ava watched him with no trace of cruelty, only solemn justice. As the officers approached, Jonathan leapt to his feet and pointed at Ava. She's nothing. She's a maid. She doesn't belong here. The words, intended to wound, fell flat. Because the truth was obvious now. She didn't just belong, she owned the room. I'm not a maid, Ava replied softly. I'm the daughter of Edward Bennett. And I'm done cleaning up your mess. The officers cuffed Jonathan and read him his rights. The flashing lights of press cameras filled the room as his name began to echo across breaking news channels. Emily stood as he was led past her, and for the first time in 20 years, she looked him in the eye and said, I don't know who you are. And then she turned away. As the doors shut behind Jonathan, the silence that followed was not just one of shock, but of reckoning. And Ava Coleman Bennett stood alone in the center of it all, no longer the janitor, no longer the forgotten daughter, but the woman who exposed a monster, and took back everything he tried to steal. The moment Jonathan Bennett was escorted out in handcuffs, the atmosphere in the grand ballroom shifted from horrified silence to a tidal wave of stunned murmurs and snapping camera flashes. Reporters pressed forward from every angle. Guests who had once laughed at Ava now looked at her with wide, unblinking eyes, unsure if they were witnessing a tragedy, a revolution, or both. Ava remained standing at the center of it all, serene, steady, and unshaken. Ms. Bennett, a reporter called out, the microphone trembling in her hands. What do you plan to do now that Jonathan's secrets are out? Will you take over the Bennett estate? Another voice cut in. Is it true you're the rightful heir to the Bennett fortune? Ava raised a hand, not to silence them, but to steady the moment. I appreciate your questions, she said calmly, but this was never about fortune. This was about truth. And restoring my mother's dignity. My father's legacy. And my own voice. The crowd grew quiet again. Even the journalists, for a beat, put down their cameras. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, handing Ava the folder of compiled evidence. It's over, Ava. What he stole can now be returned. Including your father's company. Ava accepted the folder, but she didn't smile. Because while one chapter had closed, another, far heavier, was beginning. The guests slowly began to leave, murmuring among themselves. Some nodded to Ava with remorseful respect. Others fled the mansion with shame etched across their faces, no longer proud to be connected to the man who once ruled this house. But Ava stayed. She wandered through the corridors alone, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She paused by a tall oil painting, her father's portrait. Edward Bennett stood dignified, proud, hands crossed behind his back. A tear slipped down her cheek. You didn't deserve any of this, she whispered. But I kept my promise. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded photograph, her mother, young and smiling, holding baby Ava in front of the old piano that used to sit in the East Hall. That piano was gone now, sold during the estate's modernization. So many things were gone. But not Ava. Not anymore. Hours later, in the soft silence that followed the chaos, Emily Bennett remained seated on one of the ballroom couches. Her makeup had smeared from tears, and her once pristine gown now clung to her like a costume she no longer wanted to wear. Ava approached her slowly, offering her a glass of water. Emily looked up, startled. I don't expect forgiveness from you, Ava said gently. And I don't owe you any. But I know what it's like to have your world shattered. And if you ever need to speak the truth to your children, I hope you'll do it. Emily's lips trembled. She reached for the water with shaking hands. I had no idea, she whispered. I thought Jonathan, He told me your mother was a liar. That you were just some girl from the streets. Ava nodded. That's how he won. He made people believe lies. Emily stared at the floor, guilt anchoring her body. I let him humiliate you tonight. I let him turn this into a joke. You weren't the only one, Ava replied, her voice still soft. But I want to believe you're not beyond change. A long pause stretched between them before Emily spoke again. Do you hate me? Ava shook her head. No, she said. Because hate would make me like him. And I'd rather be free. Then Ava walked away, leaving Emily crumpled in silence. The next morning, Ava stood before the courthouse with her attorney Alex Turner. A formal press conference had been scheduled. Dozens of cameras waited, reporters jostling for position on the courthouse steps. Ava wore a simple white dress, no diamonds, no silk, no symbols of wealth. Only clarity. Today, Alex began, my client, Ava Coleman Bennett, is filing a motion to reclaim her rightful ownership stake in Bennett Corporation, based on documented fraud and suppression of inheritance by Jonathan Bennett. The crowd erupted in questions. But Ava held up her hand. I'm not doing this to reclaim power, she said firmly. I'm doing this to reclaim purpose. Bennett Corporation was once built on the values my father stood for, integrity, generosity, and vision. My brother used it as a personal fortress. I intend to return it to what it was meant to be, a company that builds, not destroys. Will you become CEO? Someone shouted. I will accept leadership only if the board and employees support it, she answered. And I intend to lead differently. One reporter asked, what would your father say if he saw you now? Ava looked into the lens, eyes moist but proud. He'd say I did the right thing. And I think, wherever he is, he's smiling. That night, Ava returned to her modest apartment, not the estate she could now legally reclaim. She opened a letter she had tucked away for 2 decades, the final letter her mother had written on her deathbed. It read, My darling Ava. If you ever find the strength to fight for your name, fight with dignity. Don't let their cruelty make you cruel. What they stole from us wasn't just money, it was belonging. And you, my love, will one day make them remember who you are. Love always. Mama. Ava closed the letter, pressed it to her chest, and looked toward the ceiling. She had done it. And yet, she wasn't done. In the weeks that followed the explosive night at the Bennett mansion, headlines swirled across every media outlet in the country. CEO in cuffs, Jonathan Bennett arrested in scandal of the decade. Maid turned heiress. The woman who took down Beverly Hills royalty. Ava Coleman Bennett, the name Jonathan tried to bury now owns the empire. But for Ava, none of the headlines brought comfort. She had uncovered the truth, yes. She had exposed Jonathan, restored her father's honor, and reclaimed her place in the Bennett legacy. But there was no joy in dragging a brother into the light for the world to judge, not even a cruel one. Her peace would not come from his downfall, but from what came next. It was time to rebuild. The Bennett Corporation had been teetering on the edge ever since the arrest. The board was in chaos. Investors panicked. Employees feared mass layoffs. And when Ava walked through the company's double-glass doors for the first time, not as a maid sneaking past security, but as a shareholder stepping into her birthright, an entire office went quiet. People stood. Whispers rippled. She wasn't wearing a designer suit. She didn't carry a designer bag. But she held something heavier than luxury, legitimacy. The head of operations, a stern man in his 50s named Howard Bell, greeted her stiffly. Ms. Coleman, he said. Or Bennett? You can call me Ava, she replied with a warm smile. But yes, the name on the legal documents will be Coleman Bennett. Let's not erase where I came from. He blinked. That wasn't the answer he expected. In the boardroom, where once she'd vacuumed crumbs from beneath chairs, Ava now sat at the head of the table. The remaining board members looked at her with a cocktail of curiosity, apprehension, and skepticism. "You don't have an MBA," one of them said. "You haven't worked in finance or tech leadership. Why should we trust you to run a billion-dollar company?" Ava didn't flinch. "You trusted a man who murdered his father and stole from sick children," she replied evenly. "Not because of credentials, but because he wore the right suit and shook the right hands. I'm not here to impress you with titles. I'm here to lead with conscience." They fell silent. "I'm not interested in keeping the status quo," she continued. "That culture nearly destroyed this company. If I have your support, I'll prove we can rebuild with ethics and transparency at the core. If not, I'll do it anyway, with or without your help." By the end of the meeting, half the room had pledged their support. The others, well, Ava wasn't naive. She knew change never came without resistance. But her resolve was immovable. She started with small, radical steps. The janitorial staff, once ignored and mistreated, received raises and full benefits. Ava met with them personally, learning their names, their stories, their children's dreams. She remembered what it felt like to mop floors while being treated like furniture. Every employee under the Bennett banner was given access to anonymous reporting channels to flag corruption, harassment, or inequality. And then came the public announcement: 25% of executive bonuses would be redirected into a new fund for employee education and health programs. The business press called her idealistic. The old guard investors balked. But the people? The people rallied behind her. Her transparency, her humanity, her refusal to climb a corporate ladder soaked in blood, these became her strengths. And slowly, something rare happened in corporate America. People began to believe. Not in a brand, but in her. One morning, as Ava walked into the office, she noticed a small envelope taped to her door. No name. Just a short note inside. "My son was in the hospital. The charity Jonathan stole from was supposed to help cover his treatments. We were denied. But thanks to your new fund, he's getting the surgery. Thank you for doing what he never did, care. Just a grateful parent." Ava closed her eyes, holding the note to her chest. This was why she fought. Not for revenge. For redemption. A few days later, as she stood in the rooftop garden overlooking downtown Los Angeles, Alex Turner joined her with updates on the federal case. Jonathan's trial was underway. The evidence was overwhelming. His legal team was already angling for a plea deal to avoid life imprisonment. "You don't have to testify if you don't want to," Alex said. "The audio, the documents, Dr. Carter's statement, they've got him cornered." Ava watched the clouds drift across the sky. "I will testify," she said quietly. "Not to punish him. But because there's a little girl out there right now, being told she's nothing. I want her to know that she's not invisible. That even if the world tries to bury her, she can rise." Alex nodded solemnly. "You've already become something bigger than this case, Ava. You've become hope." She shook her head gently. "No. I'm just a woman who got tired of being silent." From behind them, they heard a voice. "Mama." Ava turned, eyes lighting up. Mia and Ethan, her adopted children, ran across the garden, arms wide, faces glowing. Ava knelt, catching them in a tight embrace. The world saw a corporate heiress, a scandal survivor. But here, in this quiet moment of joy, Ava knew who she truly was. A woman who turned her pain into power. A survivor who rebuilt everything. And a mother, holding the future in her arms. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Cameras lined the back wall, news anchors whispered into microphones, and every eye fixated on the defense table, where Jonathan Bennett sat shackled and hollow-eyed. Gone was the confident smile. Gone was the tailored pride. All that remained was a man unraveling beneath the weight of his own lies. The prosecution's evidence had been damning: wire transfers, doctored reports, audio tapes. The embezzlement alone would have been enough for a lengthy sentence. But the murder of Edward Bennett, his own father, was the anchor dragging him into infamy. And now, the prosecution called its final witness. A hush fell over the courtroom. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "we'd like to call Ava Coleman Bennett to the stand." Ava stood slowly. In a navy blue suit, not glamorous, not distracting, she walked to the witness box with quiet authority. As she took her oath, Jonathan looked up for the first time in days. His lips trembled. His fingers fidgeted with the chain of his cuff. She didn't meet his gaze. The prosecutor began with the basics: her name, her relation to the deceased, her knowledge of the ring, the family business. The court listened with growing awe as Ava's clear, steady voice painted a picture of betrayal that stretched over 2 decades. She spoke of being thrown out of her home. Of working as a maid in the mansion her father built. Of the night Jonathan handed her an invitation not to uplift her, but to humiliate her. And then she described the moment she realized that his cruelty wasn't just about class or power, but guilt. "Jonathan never expected me to show up," she said, eyes trained on the jury. "He believed I was too broken to speak, too small to fight. He thought shame had defeated me." A brief silence passed. "But shame didn't defeat me," she added softly. "It forged me." Jonathan lowered his head. When the prosecutor gestured to the ring, Ava slipped it off and held it up for the jury to see. "This is my father's ring. The last thing he gave me. Jonathan tried to bury everything that connected me to the Bennett name. But he forgot, truth doesn't stay buried forever." The courtroom sat in total silence, breathing only when she paused. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. The defense attorney rose, but even he looked weary, his spirit dulled. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "do you believe your brother is beyond redemption?" Ava blinked. The question hung heavy in the air. "No," she said after a long pause. "I believe everyone has a choice. Jonathan chose to betray his family, to kill our father, to exploit people who couldn't fight back. Redemption isn't something I can give him. That's between him and God." The defense attorney nodded once and sat down. Her testimony was over. As Ava stepped down, she passed Jonathan for the final time. He looked up, eyes glassy. "Ava," he whispered. "I'm sorry." She stopped. Turned. And looked at him, not with vengeance, not with pity, but with finality. "You're not sorry for what you did," she said. "You're sorry you got caught." Then she walked away. The jury needed less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. As the judge handed down a life sentence without parole, Jonathan slumped forward. There was no shouting. No plea. Only the slow shatter of a man watching his empire dissolve into dust. Ava sat quietly in the courtroom, hands folded, eyes closed, not in satisfaction, but in peace. Justice had been served. But her story wasn't over. In the weeks that followed, Ava returned to the helm of the Bennett Corporation, but with a deeper purpose than ever. The company's new mission statement, written by Ava herself, echoed through every office, printed on every wall. Profit means nothing without purpose. Legacy means nothing without love. She launched the Coleman Initiative, a philanthropic wing dedicated to children from underserved communities, especially those who had lost parents to violence, incarceration, or systemic injustice. Under Ava's leadership, the company opened mentorship programs, sponsored college scholarships, and even offered therapy grants to former Bennett employees traumatized by Jonathan's reign. And she didn't stop there. Ava met with lawmakers, pushing for corporate accountability laws that would protect whistleblowers and prevent CEOs from hiding behind tax loopholes and shell companies. At one rally, a young girl asked Ava, "Why do you still care, even after you won?" Ava crouched beside her, smiling. "Because winning means nothing if you leave the next person behind." I want to build a world where you don't have to fight as hard as I did. The girl nodded, eyes wide with admiration. That night, Ava returned home to Mia and Ethan waiting at the dinner table with wide smiles and a mess of spaghetti sauce. Ethan had built a cardboard model of her office for a school project. Mia had drawn a crayon picture of Mommy fighting the bad guys. Ava laughed for the first time in days. A deep, full, healing laugh. Not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer ruled her. And just as she tucked the kids into bed, her phone buzzed. It was an email. From a women's shelter in Chicago. Subject line, "You gave us hope." The message was simple. Thank you. Because of your story, 5 women came forward today. One of them said, if Ava can speak her truth, so can I. We owe you more than you know. Ava sat back on her bed, tears silently falling as she stared at the screen. She had walked into that mansion expecting to be mocked. She had walked out changing lives. The following spring, the Bennett Corporation unveiled its most ambitious project yet, a sprawling community hub in downtown Los Angeles named the Phoenix Center, built on land once owned by one of Jonathan's shady shell companies. Now, it would house free legal aid, mental health counseling, childcare services, and career training for families in crisis. The grand opening brought Ava back to the same place where her name had once been erased. But this time, her name was on the cornerstone. She stood on a small stage before a crowd of city leaders, reporters, employees, and dozens of ordinary families who had benefited from the Coleman Initiative. I was once told I didn't belong in rooms like this, Ava began, her voice carrying through the bright morning air. But I've learned that when you walk in with truth, you're not just walking in for yourself, you're walking in for everyone who's been silenced. Applause rose from the crowd. Ava continued, her hand resting gently on the podium. This center isn't just about righting the wrongs of my past. It's about planting seeds for the future. Because every child who walks through these doors will know, your worth isn't determined by where you're born, how you're dressed, or who doubts you. It's in your heart. And your voice. A young girl in the crowd, no older than 9, raised her hand and shouted, "We love you, Ms. Ava." Laughter bubbled through the audience. Ava smiled warmly. "I love you too, sweetheart." She left the stage to a standing ovation. Later that evening, she walked the halls of the Phoenix Center alone, brushing her fingers over freshly painted murals, stopping to admire drawings children had already pinned up along the community art wall. One sketch caught her eye, of a tall woman in a green dress, standing on a staircase with her chin held high. She blinked back a tear. That moment, once drenched in cruelty, had become something else, an awakening. Back home, Ava tucked Mia and Ethan into bed. They were growing fast. Ethan now asked deep questions about ethics and fairness, while Mia proudly declared she wanted to become a lawyer, a CEO, and a superhero, like Mommy. Ava kissed their foreheads and sat quietly in her study. From a drawer, she pulled out the last letter she'd received from prison, a final note from Jonathan. Ava. I know nothing I write can erase the pain. But behind these walls, I've learned more about myself than I ever did in freedom. If you ever visit my grave one day, I hope you won't bring flowers. Just bring peace. That would be enough. Jonathan. She folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box alongside her mother's final note and her father's watch. She didn't hate Jonathan anymore. He had been consumed by greed and fear, but he had also been a product of a world that rewarded cruelty and mocked compassion. Ava had broken that cycle. Not with vengeance, but with vision. In the months that followed, Ava became a national voice for justice reform and corporate ethics. Her story was taught in universities, studied in leadership courses, and adapted into documentaries. But she never let it go to her head. She still cooked breakfast for her kids. She still called the janitorial team by name when she walked the Bennett offices. And she still kept the emerald dress she wore that night tucked away in her closet, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of who she was when she chose to rise. On the one-year anniversary of the gala, Ava stood outside the Bennett mansion, not as a guest, not as a servant, but as its new legal owner. She turned to the press gathered for the event. "This mansion once symbolized corruption and cruelty," she said. "But today, it becomes the Bennett Center for Truth and Equity, a home for education, for healing, and for giving voice to the unheard." The doors opened wide behind her. And Ava walked inside, not alone, but with dozens of young leaders, artists, and activists following close behind. A new generation. A better one. The chandeliers still glittered, but this time, they reflected something far more radiant than gold: hope. Ava Coleman Bennett's journey reminds us that sometimes the smallest voice can bring down the loudest lie. That real power doesn't come from wealth or revenge, it comes from truth, dignity, and the courage to rise after being cast aside. As Ava once said, "You may try to bury the truth. But the truth is a seed. And someday, it will grow back stronger than ever." If this story moved you, please subscribe to True Echo for more powerful tales of justice, redemption, and courage. Leave a comment to share your thoughts, and don't forget to pass this story on. Someone out there might need it more than you know.